The air inside the Austin real estate agency was as cold and sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. Polished concrete floors reflected the harsh glare of recessed lighting, and floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic, silent movie view of the Texas Hill Country baking under a relentless sun. Inside this refrigerated world of brushed steel and minimalist furniture, ambitious young realtors moved like sharks in a tank, their expensive suits a dark armor against the world. They spoke in hushed, predatory tones about closing dates and seven-figure commissions, their voices a low hum of pure, unadulterated ambition. It was a place that sold the dream of a rustic, authentic life on sprawling ranches. Yet there was nothing authentic about it. The atmosphere was thin and sharp, smelling only of industrial-strength cleaner and the faint, desperate scent of expensive cologne. Caleb sat at his designated glass desk, a man adrift in this sea of calculated smiles. In his late 30s, he had once been the agency's star, but the years of pressure had sanded him down to a state of quiet exhaustion. His suit, though well cut, was a season or two out of style, the fabric at the elbows just beginning to shine from wear. He projected a professional calm, a skill honed over a decade of selling properties, but his eyes told a different story. They were tired, carrying the weight of mounting personal debt and the crushing, abusive sales targets set by his boss. He was a master at painting a picture of tranquility for wealthy city dwellers, yet he himself had forgotten what peace felt like. He sold the idea of putting down roots to others while his own were withering from a lack of purpose. The quiet hum of the office was broken by the arrival of an anomaly, an impeccably maintained late-80s Ford F-150, its blue paint faded by decades of sun, parked right out front among the Teslas and imported SUVs. A moment later, the glass doors slid open and an old man stepped inside. He was around 75, his skin a roadmap of wrinkles carved by a lifetime of outdoor work, his hands thick and calloused. He wore a simple plaid work shirt and worn denim jeans, but he stood with an unshakable dignity. A hush fell over the room. The young realtors exchanged smirks and dismissive glances before turning back to their screens. Caleb's boss, from his glass-walled office, caught his eye and made a subtle, sharp gesture. A flick of the hand that clearly meant, "Don't waste your time on that type." But Caleb saw more than just old clothes and weathered skin. In the old man's calm, lucid eyes and the quiet strength of his posture, he saw a ghost. He saw his own grandfather, a man of simple honesty and deep integrity whom Caleb had long since buried in his memory. It was an unexpected, powerful jolt to his soul, a sudden break from the cynical script he lived by every day. The boss's order, the snickering colleagues, the crushing weight of his bills, it all faded into a dull background noise. In a silent act of rebellion against the system that was slowly erasing him, Caleb pushed his chair back, stood up, and walked toward the old man, a genuine, unforced smile appearing on his face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. It's in moments like these, when a person chooses kindness over convenience, that a story truly begins. If you feel that too, subscribing to our channel ensures we can keep sharing these powerful accounts of human decency. Caleb gestured toward a small, sleek coffee machine tucked away in a corner of the office. "Can I get you some coffee, sir?" he asked. His voice, steady and calm. The old man, who introduced himself as Samuel, nodded with a gentle smile. As Caleb prepared the drinks, he braced himself for the usual talk of square footage and property taxes. Instead, Samuel spoke of things Caleb hadn't heard in years. He didn't ask about market value, he asked about the character of the soil. He spoke of the deep, earthy smell that rises from the ground just before a summer rainstorm, a scent he called the breath of the land itself. He described the way the morning light filtered through the leaves of a sprawling live oak, the kind of tree his late wife, Eleanor, had always loved. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a quiet lesson in what truly mattered. Listening to him, Caleb felt a profound and unsettling shift within himself. The sterile office, the hum of computers, the predatory whispers of his colleagues, it all seemed to dissolve, replaced by vivid memories of his own childhood. He saw his grandfather's hands, calloused and stained with dirt, holding out a freshly picked tomato, its skin warm from the sun. He remembered the simple, unshakable integrity of the man who believed a person's word was the most valuable thing they owned. Caleb had buried that part of his life deep, convinced it had no place in this new world of cutthroat deals and empty promises. Now, sitting across from Samuel, he felt a painful ache of nostalgia, a longing for a truth he had long ago traded for a commission check and the illusion of success. His phone buzzed on the desk, a jarring intrusion. The screen lit up with his boss's name, Marcus. Caleb knew what the call would be. It would be a torrent of barely concealed fury, a litany of his failures, a sharp reminder of his mounting debts and the impossible sales quotas he was failing to meet. Marcus would tell him he was a fool for wasting company time on a charity case, a worthless old man who probably couldn't afford the gas to drive his ancient truck home. The pressure was a physical weight, a tightening in his chest that had become a constant companion. For a moment, Caleb's hand hovered over the phone, the ingrained habit of obedience almost taking over. His entire career, his very survival in this city, depended on answering that call and placating the man on the other end. But then he looked at Samuel, who was calmly sipping his coffee, his gaze fixed on the distant hills outside the window, a picture of quiet dignity. In that instant, Caleb made a choice. It wasn't a grand, dramatic gesture, but a silent, internal rebellion. He reached over and pressed the power button on his phone, plunging the screen into darkness. The sudden silence was deafening. He was cutting himself off, not just from his boss, but from the entire system of fear and pressure that had been slowly suffocating him. He was choosing this one, real moment, over 1,000 fake promises of future success. It's a terrifying thing to risk everything on a single, quiet act of conscience. If you believe in the power of such moments, subscribing helps us continue to bring these stories to light, reminding us that decency is a choice we all can make. The best properties aren't always the ones on the list, Caleb said, his voice imbued with a newfound resolve. Let's take a drive. I want to show you some places that have a bit more soul. Samuel simply nodded, a knowing look in his clear eyes, and they walked out of the frigid office into the blistering Texas heat. They climbed into Caleb's car, a leased sedan that felt as impersonal as his office cubicle. As they drove away from the city, the landscape began to change. The glass and steel towers gave way to rolling hills, dotted with ancient oaks and weathered farmhouses. Samuel watched the scenery pass by, occasionally pointing out a plot of land that was being bulldozed for a new luxury subdivision, his expression one of quiet sorrow. He spoke of how the land remembered everything, every season, every family, and how these new developments erased its memory. Their first stop was a property that epitomized everything Caleb had come to despise. It was a modern ranch, a sprawling minimalist structure of glass and concrete plopped down in the middle of a perfectly manicured lawn, devoid of a single native tree. The listing boasted about its smart home technology and imported Italian marble, but it felt cold and lifeless. Samuel walked the perimeter slowly, his worn boots a stark contrast to the pristine artificial turf. He didn't look at the house. He looked at the sky, at the horizon. He crumbled a bit of the dry, compacted soil in his hand. He was polite to the listing agent who met them there, but his questions were about the water table and the health of the nearby creek, not about the square footage of the master bedroom. He thanked the agent for his time and, as they drove away, said quietly, "A house is not a home." Back at the agency, Caleb's absence had not gone unnoticed. Jason, a younger, relentlessly ambitious realtor who viewed Caleb as a dinosaur, saw his chance. He had been circling a major client of Caleb's for weeks, a tech millionaire looking for a showpiece property. Seeing Caleb's car gone and knowing he was out with the old farmer, Jason made his move. He called the client, his voice dripping with false concern. "I'm so sorry," Jason said smoothly. "Caleb seems to have been pulled away by a personal matter. He left with some old man, looked like he needed a handout. I wouldn't want your deal to be delayed by his distractions. I can take over immediately and ensure you get the attention you deserve." He painted a picture of Caleb as unprofessional and unreliable, skillfully stealing the multi-million-dollar deal that Caleb had desperately needed to stay afloat. Unaware of the betrayal, Caleb drove Samuel to a second property. This one was older, a traditional ranch house with a wraparound porch, but it had been updated for the market, its rustic charms stripped away and replaced with generic grey paint and stainless steel appliances. As they walked near a small, overgrown pasture, Samuel stopped. He pointed to a patch of stubborn wildflowers pushing their way through the dry grass. "Eleanor loved these," he said, his voice soft with memory. "She used to say they were tougher than they looked. She said they were like honest people. They don't need a lot of fuss to grow, just a little bit of sun and a place to put down roots." For the first time, Caleb saw the profound depth of the old man's loneliness, the quiet, aching grief he carried for the woman who had shared his life and his love for the land. The weight of his decision began to press down on Caleb. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and he had accomplished nothing by his company's standards. He had spent an entire day driving a man around who clearly had no intention of buying these sterile, overpriced properties. The cynical voice in his head, the one that sounded so much like Marcus, started its relentless whisper. "You're a fool, Caleb. You're losing everything for nothing. Your bills are due. Your career is over." He caught his own reflection in the rear-view mirror, the tired eyes, the faint lines of desperation around his mouth. He was a man adrift, chasing a feeling of authenticity that he feared no longer existed, a ghost hunting other ghosts. Was this one act of defiance worth the price of his entire life? Samuel, with the quiet perception of a man who has spent a lifetime observing the subtle shifts in nature, seemed to sense Caleb's inner turmoil. As they drove in silence, he reached out a steady, calloused hand and rested it for a moment on the car's dashboard. He didn't look at Caleb, but kept his eyes on the road ahead. "You know," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble, "a man's only in a great hurry when he's running from something. Usually, it's himself." The simple, profound words landed with the force of a physical blow. They cut through Caleb's rising panic and settled his chaotic thoughts. Samuel wasn't just looking for land, he was seeing right into Caleb's soul, recognizing the frantic race he'd been running and offering him a moment of stillness. The old man's wisdom was a quiet anchor in his storm. Later that afternoon, while Samuel was down by a dry creek bed, examining the stones and the ancient cypress roots, Caleb checked his phone. There was a string of missed calls and a final, venomous voicemail from Marcus. The message was short and brutal. "You're done, Caleb. Don't bother coming back to the office. Your things will be in a box at reception. You chose to waste your day with some broke old farmer instead of closing the biggest deal of the quarter. You made your choice. You're fired." The words should have shattered him. For years, the threat of being fired had been the engine of his anxiety, the monster under his bed. He listened to the message twice, the cold, dismissive tone echoing in the quiet of the car. He was officially ruined. Yet, as he sat there, the engine idling, a strange and unexpected feeling washed over him. It wasn't despair, it was peace. The monster was out from under the bed, and it wasn't nearly as terrifying as he had imagined. The worst had happened, and he was still here. He looked out the window at Samuel, who was now standing, looking up at the vast, open sky, a figure of quiet strength and resilience. Caleb realized that for the first time in a decade, he wasn't performing. He wasn't selling a dream he didn't believe in to people he didn't respect. He was simply helping a good man. He had lost his job, but in the process, he had found something he hadn't even realized was missing: a small, sturdy piece of his own soul. With a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years, Caleb decided to show Samuel one last place. It wasn't on any list, not officially for sale. It was just a piece of land he knew. A quiet sanctuary he'd discovered on a long drive one day when the city felt like it was crushing him. "There's one more spot," he said, his voice even. "It's not a property, really. It's just a place." They left Caleb's soulless sedan behind and took Samuel's old truck, the rumble of its engine a comforting, honest sound. They drove further out, away from the paved roads and planned communities, onto a dirt track that wound through groves of cedar and mesquite. Caleb wasn't a realtor anymore. He was a guide, sharing a secret. He was taking this man not to a house, but to a feeling, a place where the land still spoke its own language, dominated by a single, magnificent live oak that stood like a king on the crest of a hill. They parked the truck and walked in silence toward the ancient tree. The air was warm and smelled of dry grass and rich earth. Samuel approached the oak with a reverence Caleb understood completely. He placed a calloused hand on its rough, gnarled bark, his gaze traveling up its massive branches that reached for the sky like open arms. He stood there for a long time, looking out at the rolling hills bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon sun. Caleb didn't try to sell it. He simply told Samuel what he knew. "It's belonged to the same family for 100 years, he said quietly. "They've refused every developer that's come knocking." Samuel closed his eyes, taking a long, slow breath as if tasting the air, feeling the history. Then he turned to Caleb, a look of profound peace on his face, and said with absolute certainty, "This is it." The words settled between them, not as the end of a transaction, but as the conclusion of a pilgrimage. A quiet understanding passed between the two men. Samuel walked back to his old truck and retrieved a worn leather folio. He laid it on the hood, the metal still warm from the sun, and unfastened the simple buckle. Caleb expected to see a checkbook or maybe some personal financial statements. Instead, his breath caught in his throat. The folio was filled with property deeds, dozens of them, bound together with a simple leather tie. They were deeds for sprawling ranches, valuable commercial lots in downtown Austin, and vast, undeveloped tracts of land across the entire state. Caleb stared, dumbfounded, as he recognized the names of some of the most powerful landholding corporations in Texas. Samuel wasn't just a rancher, he was an empire. Samuel watched Caleb's face, his expression one of gentle empathy, not pride. "Son, I wasn't looking to buy land today," he said, his voice a low, kind rumble that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. "I own land. I came into your city looking for something much harder to find. I came looking for an honest man." He explained how he had visited 6 other high-end agencies that day. In every one, they saw his clothes, his truck, his age, and they wrote him off. They judged the cover and never bothered to read the book. "Money can buy a ranch," Samuel continued, his gaze unwavering, "but it can't buy the character of the man who sells it. In every other office, they saw a waste of time. You were the only one who saw a person. It's moments like these that restore your faith in people. And if these stories matter to you, subscribing allows us to keep finding and sharing them." The full weight of the day finally descended upon Caleb. But it was not a burden, it was an anchor. The firing, the stolen client, the years of quiet desperation, it all dissolved under the weight of Samuel's words. Tears began to stream down his face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of grief or even of happiness for the money he now knew was coming. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. It was the release of a pressure he hadn't even known he was carrying. His grandfather's values, The ones he thought he had buried and betrayed were not obsolete after all. They were priceless. Samuel put a steady hand on his shoulder. "The commission for finding this place and for being the man you are is $150,000 or two," he said. But Caleb barely heard him. He had lost his job, but he had found his soul. The following weeks were a blur of focused, purposeful action. Caleb never set foot in his old office again. He used the commission from Samuel not as a windfall to pay off his crushing debts, but as the foundation for an entirely new life. He paid what he owed, freeing himself from the chains of financial anxiety, and with the remainder, he leased a small, unassuming office in a quieter part of town. He named his new venture Roots Realty, a name that was both a promise to his clients and a tribute to the values he had rediscovered. The office had no glass walls or brushed steel. Instead, it was filled with warm wood, comfortable chairs, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. It was a place designed not to intimidate, but to welcome. He was no longer selling properties. He was helping people find their place in the world, one honest conversation at a time. Caleb and Samuel became the kind of friends whose bond is forged in a single transformative day. They spoke often, not about business, but about life, about the changing seasons and the simple, profound truths of the land. On the property under the great live oak, Samuel did not build a mansion. Instead, he started a small community foundation in his late wife's name, dedicated to teaching local youth about sustainable agriculture and land stewardship. He wanted to ensure that the next generation understood that the earth was not a commodity to be bought and sold, but a living inheritance to be cared for. Caleb often visited not as a realtor, but as a friend, finding a quiet peace under the sprawling branches of the ancient tree that had, in a way, saved them both. He watched as Samuel, a man who owned an empire, found his greatest joy in teaching a child how to plant a seed. Roots. Realty flourished in a way Caleb's old agency never could. It grew not on cutthroat tactics and seven-figure deals, but on a reputation for integrity and genuine care. His clients were not tech millionaires looking for a showpiece, but families, teachers, and small farmers searching for a place with a soul. Caleb found a deep, quiet happiness in his work, a satisfaction that had nothing to do with the size of his commission check. He had rediscovered his purpose in the simple act of connecting good people to good land. He had learned that true wealth wasn't measured by a bank account, but by the peace you feel at the end of the day. It's a powerful lesson, and knowing these stories resonate with you is what keeps us going. Subscribing is the simplest way to help us share more of them. 5 years later, the afternoon sun streamed into the warm, inviting office of Roots Realty. Caleb, now in his early 40s, looked serene and content, the deep weariness in his eyes replaced by a calm, steady light. He was sitting across from a young, simply dressed couple, their faces a mixture of hope and anxiety as they spoke of their dream of owning their first small piece of land. On the wall behind him, a simple wooden frame held a photograph of Caleb and Samuel, laughing together under the magnificent live oak. As the couple finished speaking, Caleb smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes. He stood up and walked over to a small coffee pot in the corner. "First things first," he said, his voice kind and steady as he reached for 2 mugs. "Can I get you some coffee?"